Hey guys, today we are diving into the voice that defined 90s R&B that was silenced too soon. Gerald Levert wasn't just another soul singer, he was royalty, the heir to Eddie Levert's throne, the man who gave us classics like Casanova and Baby Hold On to Me. But behind that powerful voice and magnetic stage presence lurked questions that have never been fully answered about his sudden passing at just 40 years old. Keith Sweat raised eyebrows during a 2018 interview when he mentioned that Gerald had been pushing himself too hard in those final months. There were signs that something wasn't right, Sweat hinted, but nobody wanted to address it. Meanwhile, Johnny Gill, Gerald's LSG groupmate, has repeatedly mentioned unresolved business matters that were weighing heavily on Gerald before his death. Industry insiders have long whispered about the pressure Gerald faced balancing his solo career with family obligations and group commitments. His childhood friend Walter Williams of the OJs once commented that Gerald was carrying too many people's dreams on his shoulders, a burden that some believe contributed to the stress affecting his health. The official story cites an accidental combination of prescription medications as the cause of death, but certain details from the medical examiner's report have fueled speculation among fans. Why was Gerald taking such a complex combination of medications? Some music journalists have suggested that years of touring had left him with chronic pain issues that were more serious than publicly acknowledged. Adding another layer to the story, Gerald had reportedly been working on an autobiography that would tell the real story of his journey in the music industry. According to former producer Edwin Nicholas, this book would have revealed uncomfortable truths about certain relationships and business dealings. Curiously, the manuscript was never found after his death. What's particularly striking is how quickly Gerald's estate matters were settled compared to other music legends, almost as if someone wanted to close that chapter before too many questions could be asked. While we may never know the complete truth behind Gerald Levert's untimely passing, his musical legacy continues to resonate with fans who still wonder what might have been if one of R&B's most powerful voices hadn't been silenced so soon. When we talk about musical legacies, few families can match what the Levert name represents in R&B history. To understand Levert the group, we first need to appreciate where they came from. Eddie Levert wasn't just any soul singer. He was the powerhouse vocalist of the OJs, one of the most influential soul groups of all time. If you grew up in a black household during the 70s or 80s, the OJs weren't just playing on your stereo, they were practically family members. Love Train, Backstabbers, For the Love of Money, these weren't just hits, they were cultural touchstones that defined an era. Now imagine being born into that legacy. That was the reality for Gerald and Sean Levert, Eddie's sons who would later form two-thirds of the group Levert. From day one, music wasn't just a career option, it was practically in their DNA. What's fascinating about Gerald and Sean is that they never ran from the comparison to their famous father. Instead, they embraced it while simultaneously carving out their own unique sound. When they teamed up with childhood friend Mark Gordon in 1983 to form Levert, they weren't trying to replicate the OJ's success, they were building something new that honored that tradition while pushing it forward. At first, the industry responded with skepticism. Another case of famous kids riding their parents' coattails? We've seen that story before. But Levert quickly silenced the doubters when they released their debut album I Get Hot in 1985. The standout track Pop, Pop, Pop Goes My Mind showcased a fresh sound that blended traditional R&B with the contemporary production values of the mid-80s set. What made Levert special wasn't just their connection to soul royalty, it was their ability to bridge generations. They could satisfy the older R&B fans who appreciated traditional vocal harmonies while also appealing to younger listeners who wanted something with a more modern edge. In an era when R&B was evolving rapidly, Levert found the sweet spot between honoring tradition and embracing innovation. Their family name might have opened some doors, but it was their undeniable talent that kept those doors from closing. And as we'll see, that talent was about to take them to heights that even their famous father might have envied. Let's talk about that moment when everything changed for Levert. You know how some songs don't just chart, they become part of the cultural fabric. That's exactly what happened with Casanova in 1987. This wasn't just another R&B hit. This was a monster crossover success success that catapulted Levert from being Eddie's sons to bona fide stars in their own right. The track climbed to #5 on the Billboard Hot 100 and dominated R&B radio for months. That infectious bass line, those harmonies, and Gerald's lead vocals, pure magic that still gets people moving on dance floors today. What made Casanova special wasn't just its commercial success, it was how the song showcased each member's strengths. Gerald's powerful, emotional lead vocals carried the melody. Sean brought that energetic edge that gave the track its distinctive flavor. And Mark Gordon, though less visible, was crucial behind the scenes with his production and arrangement skills. The success of Casanova changed everything for Levert. Suddenly, they weren't just an up-and-coming R&B act, they were headliners. The album that contained the hit, The Big Throwdown, went platinum, establishing them as major players in the late 80s R&B scene. But unlike many acts who struggle to follow up a massive hit, Levert was just getting started. They continued their hot streak with songs like Just Coolin', Attitude to You, and Baby I'm Ready, tracks that showcased their versatility and cemented their reputation as one of R&B's most consistent groups. Their 1988 follow-up album, Just Coolin', proved they weren't one-hit wonders, and by the time they released Just to Please You in 1990, Levert had established a signature sound that fans could recognize instantly. Gerald's rich, emotional vocals became one of the most distinctive voices in R&B, a perfect blend of his father's soulful power with his own contemporary style. What's particularly impressive about this period is how Levert managed to evolve with the changing R&B landscape. As New Jack Swing began to dominate the charts, they incorporated elements of that sound without abandoning their soulful roots. They weren't chasing trends, they were adapting them to fit their own musical identity. By the early 90s, Levert had accomplished something remarkable. They'd stepped out of their father's shadow and established themselves as R&B royalty in their own right. But as their star continued to rise, the dynamics within the group were beginning to shift in ways that would eventually alter their trajectory forever. As the 90s progressed, something interesting began happening within Levert. While they continued releasing music as a group, Gerald Levert was increasingly stepping into the spotlight as a solo artist. His 1991 debut solo album, Private Line, was a clear signal that he was ready to explore musical territories beyond what Levert was doing as a group. This wasn't necessarily unusual in R&B groups. Think about Bobby Brown leaving New Edition or Michael Jackson's solo work alongside the Jackson 5. But it did create a new dynamic within Levert that would ultimately reshape the group's identity. What's fascinating about Gerald's solo career is that he never officially left Levert. Unlike other artists who made clean breaks from their groups, Gerald maintained his commitment to both paths simultaneously. This dual career created a unique situation where Levert continued releasing albums like For Real Though 1993 and The Whole Scenario 1997, while Gerald was also building his individual brand. The challenge, of course, was balance. As Gerald's solo star rose with hits like Baby Hold On to Me, a duet with his father Eddie, and Answering Service, the attention he received began to overshadow Levert as a group. Industry insiders noted how interviews that were supposed to be about Levert often focused primarily on Gerald, with Sean and Mark fading into the background. For Sean Levert, this shift must have been particularly complex. Here was his brother, his bandmate, his lifelong musical partner, achieving the kind of individual recognition that wasn't coming his way. Friends close to the group have suggested that Sean sometimes felt overshadowed, not just by his father's legacy, but now by his brother's solo success as well. Mark Gordon, always the least visible member of the trio, retreated further into behind-the-scenes roles, focusing on production and arrangement rather than seeking the spotlight. The balanced trio that it created, Casanova, was evolving into something different, still functional, still creating music, but with a changed internal dynamic. By the mid-90s, Gerald had become one of R&B's most respected male vocalists, collaborating with stars like Keith Sweat and Johnny Gill as part of the supergroup LSG. Their 1997 hit, My Body topped the R&B charts and further established Gerald as a force beyond Levert. Despite these changes, the group never officially disbanded. They continued recording and performing together, maintaining the Levert brand even as Gerald's individual star continued to rise. This persistence speaks to the genuine brotherhood that existed between them, a connection that transcended typical music industry relationships. But as the new millennium approached, no one could have predicted the tragic turns that would soon redefine the Levert legacy forever. November 10th, 2006, a date that still sends shockwaves through the R&B community. Gerald Levert, the voice, the heart, the soul of Levert opera, was gone at just 40 years old. The news hit like a thunderbolt. Gerald wasn't sick. There had been no public health scares. He was still actively recording and performing. His most recent album, In My Songs, was completed and awaiting release. How could someone so vital, so present in the music world, suddenly be gone? When the details emerged, the story became even more heartbreaking. Gerald had died in his sleep at his Cleveland home from an accidental combination of prescription and over-the-counter medications. He had been taking various medications for chronic pain from a shoulder injury and persistent insomnia. None of the medications were illegal. None were being abused. It was simply a tragic interaction that proved fatal. The music world's response was immediate and overwhelming. Artists from across genres expressed their shock and grief. Tributes poured in from everyone from Patti LaBelle to Stevie Wonder. His funeral in Cleveland became a who's who of R&B royalty, all gathered to say goodbye to a voice that had defined contemporary soul music for nearly 2 decades. For Eddie Levert, the pain was unimaginable. A father burying his son, a scenario that defies the natural order of life. In interviews following Gerald's death, Eddie spoke about the profound emptiness, the sense that something fundamental had been torn from his life. The man who had given us songs about love and heartbreak for decades was now experiencing a grief beyond what any lyric could capture. For Sean Levert and Mark Gordon, Gerald's death wasn't just the loss of a bandmate, it was the loss of a brother, a creative partner, and the most visible member of their musical family. Levert as a group had never officially disbanded, and there had always been the possibility of new music, new tours, new chapters in their story. Now, that future was irrevocably altered. The tragedy of Gerald's death extends beyond the personal loss to his family and friends. It represents a significant loss to music itself. At 40, Gerald was still evolving as an artist, still exploring new sounds and collaborations. The albums we'll never hear, the performances we'll never see. These represent a creative potential cut short far too soon. In the months following Gerald's passing, there were discussions about tribute concerts, posthumous releases, ways to honor his legacy. His final completed album, In My Songs, was released in February 2007, debuting at #1 on the R&B charts, a bittersweet testament to his enduring appeal. But even as the industry and fans were still processing this loss, no one could have predicted that another tragedy was looming just around the corner. Just when it seemed the Levert family had endured enough heartbreak, fate delivered another crushing blow. Less than 2 years after Gerald's death, Sean Levert was gone too, under circumstances that weren't just tragic, but infuriating. In March 2008, Sean was sentenced to 22 months in jail for failing to pay approximately $90,000 in child support, while legal consequences for unpaid support are standard. What happened next was anything but routine. Within just 6 days of entering the Cuyahoga County Correctional Center, Sean Levert was dead at age 39. The details that emerged painted a picture of shocking negligence. Sean had been taking medication for anxiety and sarcoidosis, a condition that can affect the lungs and other organs. Despite informing jail staff about his medical needs and his family attempting to deliver his prescription medication, Sean was reportedly denied access to these critical medications. According to witnesses and later legal documents, Sean's condition deteriorated rapidly. He began experiencing hallucinations, anxiety attacks, and extreme distress. Rather than receiving proper medical attention, he was allegedly restrained and placed in isolation. By the time he was finally transported to a hospital, it was too late. Sean Levert was pronounced dead on March 30th, 2008. The official cause of death was listed as complications from sarcoidosis, but the circumstances surrounding his death raised serious questions about the treatment of inmates with medical conditions. Sean's widow, Angela Lowe, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the county and the jail's medical provider. In 2010, the county settled the lawsuit for $4 million, an implicit acknowledgement that Sean's death could have been prevented with proper care. For the Levert family, this second tragedy within such a short time frame was almost beyond comprehension. Eddie Levert had now lost 2 sons in less than 2 years. The pain expressed in his interviews during this period reveals a father struggling to make sense of an unimaginable loss. What makes Sean's story particularly heartbreaking is the timing. Friends close to him reported that he had been working on new music and planning a career resurgence. After years of living somewhat in his brother's shadow, Sean was reportedly ready to establish his own musical identity. Those plans, that potential, that future, all erased in just 6 days of detention for a non-violent offense. Sean's death also highlighted serious issues within the criminal justice system, particularly how inmates with medical needs are treated. Advocates pointed to his case as an example of how even relatively minor offenses can turn into death sentences when proper medical care is denied. For fans of Levert, the loss of both Gerald and Sean within such a short period felt like the definitive end of an era. The voices that had created those unforgettable harmonies were silenced forever, leaving behind only recordings and memories of what once was and what might have been. As the music world mourned the Levert brothers, a question gradually emerged among fans: what happened to Mark Gordon? The third founding member of Levert seemed to vanish from public view, leaving no interviews, no social media presence, no public statements about his fallen bandmates. Mark had always been the least visible member of Levert, while Gerald and Sean took center stage with their powerful vocals and charismatic performances. Mark worked more behind the scenes, contributing to production, arrangements, and the overall sound that made Levert special. But his relative anonymity before doesn't fully explain his complete disappearance after the tragedies. Industry insiders who knew the group have suggested that Mark was deeply affected by the deaths of both Levert brothers. These weren't just his bandmates, they were his childhood friends. His musical brothers, partners in a journey that began when they were just teenagers with dreams of following in Eddie Levert's footsteps. What makes Mark's story particularly poignant is the silence. In an era where everyone eventually returns to the spotlight for documentaries, reunion tours, reality shows, or at least a few viral interviews, Mark Gordon has maintained his distance from the public eye. There are no major interviews, no memoir, no "Where Are They Now" features. It's as if he made a conscious decision to step away from the music industry and the painful memories it now held. Some reports suggest he continued working in music production on a smaller scale, helping other artists behind the scenes. Others claim he left the industry entirely, seeking a normal life away from the spotlight that had brought both tremendous success and devastating loss. Without Mark himself speaking publicly, these remain speculations, whispers about a man who helped create some of R&B's most memorable hits. This silence creates a strange paradox in the Levert legacy. While Gerald and Sean's stories have been told and retold through tributes, documentaries, and articles, Mark's chapter remains largely unwritten. He is the living connection to Levert's history, the last surviving member of a group that should have had decades more music to create. Perhaps there's something profound in Mark's choice to remain private. In a world that often exploits tragedy for views and clicks, that turns personal pain into public consumption. Maybe his silence speaks volumes about genuine grief and respect for his fallen brothers. For fans of Levert, Mark's absence creates a bittersweet feeling. On one hand, there's respect for his privacy and personal choices. On the other, there's a natural curiosity about his perspective on the group's legacy, his memories of creating those classic songs, and how he's processed the tragic losses of Gerald and Sean, whatever path Mark Gordon has chosen. He remains an essential part of the Levert story, the silent survivor who helped create a musical legacy that continues to touch hearts decades after those unforgettable harmonies first reached our ears.